Welcome everybody. As announced, our guest today is Saanwal Karamat Barlaas from Pakistan, who kindly agreed to be interviewed about his writing and other activities tonight in a bit more detail. My name is Barbara Ott, as most of you know. I have been joining Saanwal's writing and reading events for quite a while, so we know each other. And today I get to get into this discussion with him on behalf of Stadtbibliothek Heilbronn. There will be an opportunity at the end or even in between, since you're not as many persons, to ask him any outstanding questions you may still have for him. Saanwal, I know, or we all heard, you work as an SAP consultant. But tonight we want to find out a bit more about what makes you tick and your passions and interests. Would you quickly tell us what types of activities you're currently working on?
Okay, so first of all, I'm really glad to see you all. I think most of us have known each other for quite some time. You are our reading and writing friends, so thank you so much for taking the time this evening and joining us. I really appreciate that you guys are all here. So thanks a lot. Also, thank you so much to the people from the library, our dear friend Kirsten, who has been helping us in so many ways with the reading and writing events. So thanks a lot to everyone. Now more to your question, Barbara. What kind of things I'm doing outside of reading and writing? Let's see. I like to volunteer, so I volunteer in many different ways. The new thing I have found in terms of volunteering is the bailout for integration. So it's a recent thing that I have started, and so I'll be doing a lot more there. The idea is to connect the city with the migrants to enable communication and to address the issues of the migrants. So I'm kind of the representative, one of the representatives. There's many of my colleagues in this context. So that's one project. But I also like to, for example, teach children. I am a tutor. I have been tutoring for more than 4 years in different capacities, privately, but also voluntary to some extent. And I mean, depending on the projects, I'm always up for something new.
Cool. Yeah, that resonates a bit with me because I too do volunteer work, but certainly not as much as you do. Yeah, I personally know you're giving writing classes, but what other writing related activities have you?
Okay, I mean writing related activities, let's see. I used to write a lot more before. I don't do as much writing as I used to. It's because I have less time. But for example, my current project is a collection of poems. It is supposed to be called Eyes on You. So this is a collection of poems, so I'm hoping to get it done basically by end of this year.
So it's not yet published.
No, it's unpublished.
Really interesting, fascinating point. What is your background? You are from Pakistan. What is your background?
Yes, that's right. So I'm originally from Pakistan. I have been in Germany for almost 10 years. Recently I got the German citizenship, so that was a huge milestone for me. Really appreciate, and thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I mean, really appreciate that I got it. And again, at this point, I think it's important to mention the openness of the German people in accepting people from other countries as colleagues, as friends, as acquaintances, and so on. So I really appreciate that. I mean, you see a lot of negative news about the negative attitude towards migrants, but I have been very lucky that I've met people and I still meet people, and it's rare to meet someone who seems like he's not interested in working with you or talking to you because you're a migrant. So I mean, I'm from Pakistan, have been in Germany. I came to Germany to start my studies. I did my studies, so that was in 2015. I did a bachelor's in business at the ESB Business School, which is not so far away from here in Reutlingen, Hochschule Reutlingen. I finished that and so basically found a job in 2019 with Fujitsu TDS Neckarsulm, which is how I ended up in the region.
Yeah, and I say we we are so happy to have you because you made something happen in Heilbronn that we definitely did not have before. And that's a very eye-opening event, actually. Thank you. Before we get to hear you, how would you describe your writing style?
Okay, I'm not sure if, do you guys need the mic or is it okay without the mic? Is it okay without the mic? Yes? Okay. Because I think it's not that, I mean, maybe Barbara, you can use it because it's
cool.
Okay.
Helps a lot.
Right. Is it okay without the mic?
No, we need the mic.
We need the mic? Okay, so we stick with the mic.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, okay. So, where were we? Barbara, I think you asked a question. Yes, my writing style, right?
Yeah.
That's the question. Okay. My writing style, I think my writing style really depends on the story I'm writing. For example, if so I don't try to stick to a specific writing style. I really believe in telling the story as it is, and I don't worry too much about the writing style. I mean, the trick is to write your first draft basically without worrying too much. You don't even have to think that it has to be published. I mean, I'm not exactly J.K. Rowling, so I don't have to publish everything I write. So I can basically option to not publish stuff that might not be that good. So I try to keep my writing style simple. I don't like to read complicated texts. I think most of the people from our writing and reading community know this. Most of our books are quite easy to read. There have been a few exceptions. So I like to write in a simple style because I also like to read it in a simple style.
I'd just like to ask that because we're all going to reflect on that now. So at this point, why don't we listen to one of your texts? What did you choose for us for tonight?
Okay, I think most of you know that. I think because we've known each other for quite some time, so it's nothing new. And some of you might have even read the book. So this is my book. I mean, it's in the published form. It's a collection of short stories, The Portrait Wife and the other short stories. The main story is The Portrait Wife, of course. So I'm going to start reading The Portrait Wife, and you can get ready to listen to that. So let's see. So, The Portrait Wife, Chapter 1. Love at first sight. Okay, let's see, with the mic if I can make it happen. Once upon a time, a well-dressed, handsome young man walked out of his home. He planned to attend a social gathering. He expected to find the one girl who would be his one true love. But this man, John Smith, dreaded the same events would occur. He would find a beautiful young woman, they would go out for some time, and then the disappointments would unfold. Slowly, she would become annoying, and he would begin to see the flaws in her eyes and the spots on her skin. Her perfection would be gone, the mystery would be gone, and his lover girl would become an annoying presence, a nagging existence. He felt women complained too much, and they did not understand him. He had courted the most beautiful women in his time and age. In fact, if others looked at any of his girlfriends, they would exclaim, "What a beautiful woman! What a lucky man you are!" He was lucky indeed. However, he was feeling sad. He was feeling hopeless. He had been through a recent breakup. He was attractive, he knew that, and though not quite wealthy, he had the manners of a gentleman and the wit of a public speaker. He could talk his way around social gatherings without effort, but he preferred those gatherings where there were many women so that he could easily find the prettiest lady to court. He hoped to get married. He wanted to get married, but not to anyone. He had to be sure that the woman he chose was the most beautiful of all. He began to ask himself, is there really any woman for me? Is there any woman who is beautiful enough and yet does not complain? He was lost in his thoughts as he walked down the busy town road. Someone stopped him. "Is this my good friend John walking all by himself?" the person said. "Mr. Williams," he replied, "I'm pleased to see you too." As they had a short conversation, Mr. Williams, who was about 10 years older than he was, said to him, "I'm visiting an art gallery where they're exhibiting one of the finest paintings by the most famous painters. Would you care to join me?" "I'm afraid I have a prior engagement," he said. However, Mr. Williams insisted. "You're too afraid that you won't be able to appreciate the beauty of art." "Good sir, I appreciate beauty just fine," John said. "It's only that beauty does not appreciate me back." "Oh, do I sense a broken heart," said Mr. Williams, putting an arm around John's shoulders. "Then you must come. In this art gallery, there are paintings that depict human suffering and heartbreaks like nothing else. Come, I will help you find the depiction of your pain, and who knows, maybe we will help you find a beauty as well." John gave in. He knew he would be disappointed by going to the art gallery. Art did not excite him. He appreciated beautiful women, and that was all the art he cared for. So those are the first 2 pages.
Wow. So, John at some point seems obsessed with women or finding the right woman. Now, Saanwal, would you say the term obsessed applies to you as well?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I was not expecting this question. This is not part of the script. I'm kidding, but that's a good question. I mean, obsession is basically, so there is level of motivation. There's like you are bored, you don't want to pursue something, and then you are passionate, right? And then there's obsession. Obsession is the highest level of motivation. Obsession is the level at which some people would say, "Okay, you have gone completely mad in your pursuit of." I mean, it could be a pursuit of a person, or a pursuit of a project, or a job, or anything else. So, obsession. I like to think that obsession is a positive thing, especially if you are spending your energy positively. For example, on a creative project or a professional project. I do a lot of work. As we know, I'm involved in some different things, and I would say that yes, I have a very passionate side to me, that I become passionate about projects, and that I pursue them very, very I would say passionately, and I'm very serious about things, which is why people who work with me, people who really work with me on these projects, sometimes think I'm taking things too seriously.
Okay. I have to admit, some points you mentioned, I hadn't thought about it that way before. Thank you. Let's dwell a bit of the kind of book we have here. I clearly remember when I had ordered it, and I took it from the letterbox, and I held it in my hands, and I saw the title. I was so intrigued by the title and the picture. So I did something I'm normally unlikely to do. So I jumped to the title story at the back of the book. And how thrilled was I? I literally couldn't lay down the book. Can you tell us how long it took you to develop the story, the plot?
Okay, so I think at this point the Portrait Wife is probably, in terms of published writing, that's probably so far my best project. It was very easy to write. The story had been developing in my mind for quite some time, so it was not something I had to think a lot about, because I had been thinking about this idea for quite some time, probably for months, if not a year. So when I started writing down, I usually did the writings in the evenings, so maybe 1 or 2 hours every evening, and I think in about 1 or 2 weeks I was done with the story.
Wow. Did you listen? He called it a project. And I'd like to know, the story of The Portrait Wife is full of plot twists. First to the better, then to the worse. And as a reader, it gives you a feeling of the incidents being unescapable and of powerlessness to some extent. So does does writing give you the feeling of power, or what is the feeling that you have when you write?
Okay, it really depends on what the motivation of the writer is, but I think people don't necessarily write to gain a feeling of power. Many writers and many famous writers say that, and for example, Stephen King and the famous thriller horror writer says that you basically write a story that has been developing for quite some time. That's how you know a story is good. If it doesn't, I mean, you get many ideas. All of us get many different ideas, right? And we say, oh, that's an interesting idea. Whether you write ideas or not is a different thing. But as a writer, you get many different ideas. And I mean, some of you are writers yourself, right? We are writing together in the writing club, so you know there are some ideas that are easy to write and some more difficult. But there are certain ideas that stay with you. Maybe it's a story someone told you, and then it refuses to leave you. So basically, Barbara, if you would like to repeat your question. I think I just lost my chain of thought. Yes, what was your question?
Yeah. I had a feeling when I read this story that I can't I can just follow the events. They are inescapable. So what was your feeling when you wrote it? Did you feel powerful?
Okay, so not necessarily. I didn't think about me when I was writing this story. I was thinking about John, and I was thinking about the portrait girl or the portrait woman in the story who plays a central role, how their story develops. And I think I would like to share the original idea with the audience, because I think the original idea is very fascinating. It's also very fascinating. I mean, how I developed it is one way. So sometimes when you see a performer, any performer, a singer, a musician, an actor on stage, and then there's the performance, right? And then there's the performer. It's very easy for us to fall in love with performance. I think it's natural, right? If you like music, if you like art, anything, and then you look at a piece of art or a piece of performance, and then you fall in love with the performance, which is natural. That's called appreciating the art or performance. But there's a fundamental difference between the performance and the performer. So in this case, our young man, John Smith, falls in love with the painting, and he thinks he has fallen in love with the woman in the painting, and that's a fundamental mistake. And that's the main thing.
Yeah, that's a really unique perspective. And as you may have noticed, Saanwal is very open to any kind of question. So if you ever should have a question in between, you're welcome. Yes.
You said it only took you 2 weeks to write the book. Was that the final version, or did you work on the text for a longer time?
Okay. What's your name?
Andrea.
So, that's right. The first draft took about 2 weeks, and as you can imagine, there was more work afterwards. But the main story itself developed within the first 2 weeks. Afterwards, you improve the language. Maybe you adjust a chapter or two. But 2 weeks to write the first draft, and I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 weeks to edit the rest and to improve it and polish it.
Okay. And Mona Lisa with her enigmatic smile. Could it have been any well-known painting of a beautiful woman, or was it chosen with a special intent?
I think Mona Lisa is a very famous painting, and everyone knows that. So I think that there was also one part to it that I thought I'm not sure if I wanted to specifically use Mona Lisa, but I think it's a nice metaphor for a piece of art that's brilliant and beautiful, considered to be beautiful by many, if not all. So I stuck with that because I thought this is what most people can easily understand and identify.
Yeah, it's like an archetype. And do you personally think her to be beautiful today? I mean, these role models have shifted.
Okay, so I mean, the simple answer to that question is, as Barbara, you mentioned, so the idea of what is beautiful and what's not is shifting all the time. And what was considered beautiful in terms of physical attractiveness for women and for men, it has changed very much. So I would say, no, this is not the standard that we are following these days.
Okay, I can relate to that. I'm intrigued to hear more. Would you please give us a few more lines?
Sure. So let's go back into the book. Okay. So this is page 3. When they arrived at the art gallery, he was surprised to see a large number of visitors. It now seemed just like the social gathering he was going to visit. His face lit up. He saw well-dressed women standing next to the paintings and trying to admire those paintings by making thoughtful remarks. Mr. Williams noticed where John's gaze had wandered. "My friend," he said, "today you must appreciate the art in the paintings." "I'm trying," Mr. Williams replied John. They walked around for an hour, talking to other acquaintances, a few old friends, and many good-looking women. Mr. Williams, who was well informed about art, told him about various paintings and their historical significance. John found most of them boring, either too abstract or too random in nature. But there was one that caught his attention. "That is a special piece," said Mr. Williams. "Are you sure? And you sure must admire her, for she has been done by Leonardo da Vinci." "What's the painting called?" he asked. "Mona Lisa," said Mr. Williams. It was now quite late, and most of the visitors had left. John would have wanted to leave, but by now he was beginning to admire art. The women who showed interest in him were all gone. He was now alone standing next to Mona Lisa, and he began to feel a strange attraction for the woman in that painting. "If only I could find a woman like her in my real life," he said to Mr. Williams. "I would keep her happy forever. She has such kindness in her eyes. She is just beautiful." "Then you would marry her, would you not?" "Yes," he said. "Well, Mr. Smith, you can't marry the woman in this portrait." So this is the friend telling him. John replies, "I wish I could." "Well, let's just buy the painting," said Mr. Williams. John bought the painting and took it home. So that's basically the start of the story, and the rest is interesting too. We'll come to it.
Wow, he was beginning to admire art. You sure do have a certain narrative that I love. So there is this beginning relationship between the Mona Lisa and John. Is relationship between individuals a big thing for you in your writing?
I think the relationships between individuals are the fundamental of human society in many ways, whether it's relationships between two friends or two people in love or otherwise, right? These are the fundamental. This is how the society exists in terms of relationships, right? If there are no relationships among people in society, then the society wouldn't exist. And yes, it fascinates me how relationships are, the good, the bad, and the neutral ones. And I do think a lot, I observe a lot, and that also helps me in writing my stories.
Yeah. And you talk to people, don't you?
Yes, I mean, I do talk to people, absolutely, and I like to listen to other people's stories. I like to listen, and then I like to think about what other people said, and then that's one of the ways that you can think, and then you can maybe add some of the fantasy and write a story about it.
So this sounds very close to humans. When beginning to write a story, do you know from the beginning how it will end?
It depends. In some of the stories, yes. This book has several stories, and so in some of those I knew how it was going to end. But for example, with this one, I was not so sure. And I mean, so there is always, and many writers say that. And again, I would like to quote Stephen King, because he is not just a brilliant writer; he's also a brilliant writing teacher, you could say. And he has many interviews, and I watched many of his interviews, and he says that he doesn't know how the story is going to end. And I think I agree with him, because I really want to see how the story ends, because you may have one idea, but once you start writing a story, the story has a momentum of its own. The story has a life of its own, and a good writer is the one who lets the story develop and does not intervene too much.
Okay, I take it you put your characters in a certain position and wait what happens, what develops from there. We received a question the other day from Kirsten, I think, saying dialogues are actually hard to write, and there are really a lot of dialogues in your book. Seemingly light-footedly, is that easy for you?
I think dialogue writing is not necessarily complicated. I mean, it always depends on the standard. So with writing is a subjective business, which means every person has their own opinion, and what is considered good writing and what's considered bad writing and what is considered good dialogue and bad dialogue, this is always changing. For example, if we go 100 years back, what was considered good dialogue is no longer acceptable. It's unacceptable to write like that. It is a fact. It's a fact. If you write like Shakespeare, or if you write like, for example, Oscar Wilde, it's not considered good dialogue anymore. So it's always changing. But no, to answer your question, I don't find writing dialogues difficult, and dialogues come out of situation, so it's not so difficult to write them if you think carefully.
Yeah, seems like it. Okay, I'm intrigued to ask more, but how about we get a bit more reading?
Okay. Shall we continue with the same story?
Yes.
Okay, so I think I'll skip some and go to chapter 2, bringing her to life. In the following days, he began to notice some changes in the portrait. The lady's facial expressions had changed, but so slightly as to be barely noticeable. But John's gaze had known no better sight than that of Mona Lisa's pretty face, and he noticed every change that took place. He observed those changes and began to wonder what was going on. He felt that the woman had been listening and she was attentive to his words. Could she have been reacting to his words? After all, he had been talking to the portrait for hours, but he wasn't sure. He wondered if he was hallucinating, and thus he called upon his butler. He asked the butler to look at the portrait for a minute and then see if anything shifted. "I beg your pardon, my lord," said the butler, "but this painting is as motionless as a stone." He did not argue with the butler, but he himself knew very well that something was going on. He knew the painting had life in it. He sat there looking at the picture. After a while, the painting looked more like a window into another world, the world where beautiful Mona Lisa lived. In the coming days, the delivery of his monologues to the painting continued. He felt she listened. After the incident with the butler, who had thought him a fool but was too polite to say that, John wanted to confirm if he was hallucinating or not. When Mr. Williams came over for a visit, he narrated the events of the past few weeks, how the painting seemed to have life in it, how the woman in the painting was paying attention to him, how he was falling in love with her. They went to the room, and for the next 20 minutes, both of them observed the painting. Nothing happened. It was just a lifeless painting. Then, as the visitor began to look at John instead and was about to give a devilish smile, something happened. The slightest movement in the girl's facial expression, the tiniest change. "Did you see that?" asked John. "Yes, I did," replied the visitor. "And she loves me," added John. "I would not go that far, but yes, the painting appears to have some magical power." John was not listening. He was in another world, a world of dreams, a world where he was in love with the most beautiful woman. The painting had come to life, and a second pair of eyes had noticed it. John knew it was all true. Mr. Williams left, but not without throwing another glance at the painting. He looked at the woman, Mona Lisa. She was too beautiful to be true. He knew enough about art, and in his mind she did not depict any real woman, for no real woman could be so beautiful. To him, she was the work of an artist's mind, not a real woman. Full stop. End of chapter 2.
Yeah, the tiniest change or something like that. That was when the story really caught me off guard. If we go by the passages we got to hear so far, the story is multi-layered. It's a thrilling fantasy story, and at some point we will be reminded, or it suggests ancient tales like the mermaid tales. This picture is going to come to life, and then maybe she's trying to bargain her eternal life in that picture for her love to John or whatever. And then it's about reincarnation, and it's about worldly possessions, and it's about values we have. You may have guessed from this picture that John admires, it's about values that we have, beauty. And last but not least, it dissects a relationship between the two. So what, for you, what aspect is most important in the story?
I mean, for me, the most important thing was telling the story more than anything else. Some writers, I mean, especially famous writers, have the problem they have to address certain themes because afterwards their books are going to be published, they're going to have critique or basically reviews, so they really need themes to back their books up. Because I'm the good thing is that if you're not as famous as J.K. Rowling, you can write whatever you like and you don't have the pressure, really. This is the only upside. So for me, developing the story was the most important thing, and developing the story and making the characters develop and basically finding out how the story develops and how their relationship continues and what problems they face and how the story ends. Basically, it's just a romantic story with fantasy in it.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we were too fast because not everyone might know the book. So would you happen to have any questions in between? Anyway, okay, so what else is in the book and why?
So this book is really a collection of stories that I wrote over probably 6, 7, 8 years, with the Portrait Wife being the latest story. Latest in the sense I think I wrote it within the last 3 years, probably 3 years ago or so, something like that. And there's other stories that I have written, and I would like to share a piece from one of those. And this story is called, I think, When Her Fears Were Frozen. So that's the name of the story. We can have the first page so you guys get some idea. Badakhshan, Afghanistan. That's the location, 1941. Lord of the snowy, craggy, steeply, deadly peaks, an ocean with tsunami in it, but frozen, and the whipped up, towering, massive waves, iced up, now the low and high peaks, the carved, rocky, intrepid, steep chests, the dagger-like rigid outcrops, the deep crevices in them. You are in death zone. Snowy, crispy air, its mystic, mysterious whispering, calls you over. Defy yourself. You can't retrace your steps. You don't want to. Not unless you make it to the top. Commissioner Abdullah of the province of Badakhshan grants Mr. Antonio Abelli and Mr. Mario Bosco the permit to ascend Mount Noshak. The requests of Mr. Eva Gilbert and Claudia Descher cannot be acquiesced to at this moment. Antonio read the letter, narrowing his eyes reflexively before reflexively handing it over to Mario. No one will ever know someone came here, Antonio said, now putting another pack of energy biscuits into his already bulky backpack. Believe me, they are dumb. Rules exist in papers. Antonio, no doubt you are so sure, Mario said, chuckling. You are not a girl. They have not put restrictions on They have put restrictions only on girls. Maybe we should wait for the permits, Eva said, looking both at Mario and Antonio. The atmosphere turned impregnated with doubt, regrets, uncertainty, fear. We don't have the time, Claudia said. We can't stop for a piece of paper.
I would have said that. The story sounds enticing, and we have this impressive description of the mountains at the beginning. I see a parallel to other stories that you wrote, because in many stories there are people watching the mountains surrounding, or the hills. So what's the symbolic value in that for you?
I mean, this story is really a story of a group of 4 mountain climbers that decide to basically climb the mountain. I think it's it's called K2. I come from Pakistan, so part of the mountain is in Pakistan, part of it is in Afghanistan, part of it is in China, so it's an interesting mountain. It's got many sides to it. This story is quite different from the rest of the stories because I wrote it for a competition, the Commonwealth Short Story Writing Competition, so which is why the writing style is very different. As a writer, you really have to think of your audience, and in this case, my audience was not necessarily normal readers, but people from the selection committee of Commonwealth writers. So that's why the style is different. It's more complicated. It's not necessarily my favorite type of writing style, but if you want to compete in competitions, you have to write like that.
So back to the book we are highlighting today. what's in it for the reader? Is there always a kind of moral to your stories?
I mean, you can always draw a conclusion from the story. There's every story you can think about and interpret it as you like. I don't necessarily want my story to have a moral, but for example, in some of the cases, my stories do have a moral. In case of the portrait wife, for example, I mean, there's a couple of lessons you would take away. For example, this pure superficial obsession with physical beauty, that should be. Also, you notice that as the story develops, that John is making many mistakes. He's superficial, he's immature, and he doesn't value the true things in life, and he's more interested in superficial things. And to some extent, the portrait girl, he's also corrupting her. He's getting her used to finding pleasure with physical objects, like expensive objects and so on. So I mean, there's definitely, with that story, there's many morals, but I think every story has a moral, regardless of what the writer wants to say.
I can absolutely relate to what you said, and so you're saying you're leaving it open to the reader. So you're using a very clear and simple language and opening scope for imagination, maybe.
Yes, in some ways, yes, definitely. I think it's a good idea to leave the room open for interpretation. But I would like to point out, for example, story number 1. And this is interesting because story number 1 is what some of the people who read, they really didn't like it. But I can understand that, because story number 1 it's a story of an immature romantic relationship, and it's, to be precise, it's the story of a semi-abusive relationship. And I mean, it doesn't come with an editor's note, but it means they should not be in that relationship. I tell you guys, you are here, so you can hear that from me directly. It's not what they have is not good. They should just stay away from each other.
You may have hit an emotional point for many people with that story.
Maybe.
Anyways, I'm impressed by the wide range of genres and formats that you deal with. Does that come natural to you?
I think, especially if you are still in the early stages of writing, which I think I am in some ways, because compared to other writers who might have been writing their whole life, I think you can experiment a lot. So you can try out different types of writing. You can write basically whatever you like. This is just a collection of short stories, but as you guys know, I'm working on a collection of poems. I also wrote I also have 3 or 4 books unpublished. I wrote them probably 4, 5, 6, probably 10 years ago, some of them, 8 years ago. I never really got around to publishing them, but yeah, different types.
Okay, and I'd also like to ask, Eastern culture, when would you prefer that genre?
I mean, culture is not necessarily, for me, the most important thing is the story. So if I find an interesting story, if my uncle tells me or my mom tells me something happened to someone, and then obviously it's more likely to be coming from the eastern part of the world, from Pakistan or something like that, and that's when I want to write that story. And obviously in the context of Eastern culture, because it's where the story takes place, because every story has a unique culture. And to me, this culture is secondary, and the story is more important than the culture. But obviously, you need that culture or context for the story to unfold.
Yeah, it's like it's holding your back. Yeah. Another personal question I'd like to ask. You've now been writing and publishing for well over 10 years, or it's been almost 15 years now, and your family attaches great attention to writing. Does that become a pressure too?
Okay, I mean, so my parents are not writers. My grandparents were not writers. As a matter of fact, my grandparents, because at the time they grew up in Pakistan, they really had no opportunity to go to school, so they were not able to read and write. My dad was the first person in his family to go to university. Before that, even in his neighborhood, because it was a small town. So this writing business, it started for my brothers, my sister, my younger brother who is also joining us here. He used to write a bit more. My sister is actually a far more developed writer. She did her bachelor's in English literature or creative writing, something like that. So to some extent you could say it's a family business, but I don't think you can have so much competition because everyone has a unique writing style and everyone has their own writing topics and so on. So there is not so much competition or pressure.
So maybe we should ask Rahul to come up too. Now, were there any persons or incidents that significantly encouraged you to write? You personally?
Incidents, let's see.
Or persons,
I mean,
sometimes mentors?
Mentors, that's interesting. So I've never really, I've not received formal training in writing in terms of proper creative writing. I basically started writing when I was in high school. So I did O levels and A levels, which is like the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, or Abitur and pre-Abitur, you could say, according to the German education system. So during that time, because I did English language and English literature, so you had to write a lot for that. So you had to write that also in the exam. So it was like you get a prompt and then you have to write something about that. So that was one of the reasons why I really got involved with writing. And my younger sister, this is interesting because she used to read a lot more. I think she is probably, in our family, she's the one who has read the most books. So she used to read, and she used to basically read, and then she would narrate what she was reading, stuff like Jane Austen and Emily Bronte and stuff like that. And she would tell us those stories at night. And so I think that was a big influence why I got into writing.
This is what most people who write or read a lot share with others, that their families had a reading culture before. Even the Tagesschau speakers are telling that. Anyways, I know it's hard for you to listen to all this at night, but I would also like to know, you are a blogger. So as a blogger, what are your favorite topics?
So as a blogger, basically you can talk about and write about whatever is interesting to you. I mean, politics is a big topic. I think everyone is interested in politics in one way or another. But there's also other topics. I mean, I like to read books and I sometimes post reviews of those books on my blog. And but otherwise, I mean, also topics like everyday topics, like some projects that I might be working on. It could be related to volunteering and so on.
Okay, and if you can name a story or a piece or a text, what was the most fun to write up until now?
I mean, because we already talked about the portrait wife, so I'll skip that one and tell you about another story. So I wrote, it was also a lot of fun to write, and this was the story, if you guys know The Witch, The Wardrobe, and The Wizard, C.S. Lewis, I think, C.S. Carroll or C.S. Lewis, something like that. Yes. So that's something similar to that. I got a story similar to that. It's definitely a story for children, and I wrote that story. It's still unpublished, but I'm really thinking about publishing it, finishing it and publishing it, or editing it and publishing it. So it was the most fun to write because, again, I think the stories that are most fun to write are the ones where you have an idea and it develops and it keeps developing and it pushes you and you have to write it down.
Okay, Saanwal, I'm just thinking, I take it most of your texts are fictional. Have you ever written true stories or autobiographical stories?
I mean, autobiographical stories, let's see. I mean, I have not written my biography yet, so if this is a question, I will definitely, I think I'll do it at some point. Maybe when I'm a lot older. So I'm 31 years old, in case that's a question. So, I mean, on my blog, you definitely find stuff that's nonfiction, like reviews and other commentary on political topics.
Okay. Now let's get personal.
Okay.
You all heard that I have been joining his writing and reading club. And I personally consider writing an exhausting, a demanding, and most challenging act. As maybe you do too, I don't know. What's the hardest part or the most difficult thing for you in the writing process? And if there is something, do you ever meet this point when your mind goes blank? And if so, do you fight it?
I mean, so I think the concept that's relevant here, it's called the writer's block. For example, that's one of the problems that many writers have. But it really happens if you're under pressure. I don't feel the pressure to write. I mean, I really write whatever I like to write, and when I am not in the mood, I don't have to write. And that's because, I mean, as a writer who is just has a small audience to cater to, or basically no fixed audience, I don't feel the pressure, so I really don't have that problem. I mean, I can tell you a story about my sister. She wrote a lot, she wrote to publishers, she wanted to get some of her books published. In the end, it didn't really work out, but I really saw her having that pressure to please external audience, or to cater to the expectations of publishers, and then, oh, it has to be perfect and so on. Actually, I mean, to be very honest with you, this is not an example of a perfect book. If I had to make it perfect, it would never be published. And I am not. I mean, this is maybe something I can share. I do a lot of work, and I think I try to do a decent job on most of my writing and all the non-writing projects. And that's why I'm able to do so many things, because I worry less about if it is perfect. I worry more about if it is complete and if it's useful. So.
Yeah, I think this is what we all love and appreciate of you so much. Because you're never under pressure, you're always easygoing, and you're always supportive to us. So you said you have no pressure. What does your study at home look like? Is there a laptop? Is there a pen? Is there even paper?
She's getting this one.
Okay, so getting personal, let's see. I mean, so I live in a studio apartment. I used to live in Vegas at the very start when I was still fresh in my job or as a student, so I stopped doing that. So, and I've been living in basically, I prefer these small micro apartments where you have everything in one place. So that's your study and your bedroom and your dining room and everything else. So I have my desk, and there is definitely a pen or two, and I don't write my stories by hand. I type them basically. So, but there is a pen, yeah, and I do have many books.
Okay, I was just thinking about that desk. Because I always have a candle on my desk, so that's definitely different. Do you have any unpublished pieces or books?
Yes, so I definitely have some. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's unpublished. I think, actually, if you think about it, I'm just wondering now if maybe all writers have more stuff unpublished than not published, if you think about it, because, I mean, especially if you're in your early years, you write a lot of stuff, and you understand that you no longer want to pursue that, especially if it's a longer project, a novel, and it's a nice exercise that you wrote something. I, for example, wrote three books, full-length books, that's like 200, 300 pages, and I never published them, and I never published those, but then I published other stuff, right? It's a good idea to have done that exercise, and to have learned some things.
Yeah. I had this idea before, because I was meaning to ask you, what did you eventually not say in your stories? Did you omit anything?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff, right? If you're editing, you will take out a lot of stuff. Maybe, I mean, again, I think in my stories you find a lot more stuff than, so there's a lot of stuff that you could have taken out. But in terms of what I omitted, I mean, for example, some of the stories were inspired, for example, that story number 1, which is an example of a and I told you guys directly because it doesn't come with a note, but I think it's useful to know that it's an example of a semi-abusive relationship. And that's a story between two immature people, two young people who are who are in a relationship. They shouldn't be in that relationship, but yeah, they are, as you know, many examples probably from current age. And this is actually a story that was inspired by something my flatmate told me. So that was probably 10 years ago. This is not, I mean, he didn't use those words or anything like that, but I had a conversation with him, and he was a very friendly German guy, young, 25 years old, and he said some things to me, and I reflected upon that, and then I let that reflection develop further, and then I wrote this story basically. I don't think he knows that he is in this story. He's not in this story. I mean, the story is just inspired by him, but I mean, I observe people and I notice things, and then, for example, I can give you one example because I think it's relevant. It's not in the story, but so we were living in this student flat, student in Wohnheim, and he had started a new relationship. So I saw his girlfriend a couple of times, and so two things definitely stood out. For example, he said at one point, isn't she beautiful? What do you think? And I mean, of course I had to say yes in that case. What else was I supposed to say? That was one event. And then there was another small thing that I noticed, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, he shouldn't have to ask me for confirmation. Like, this is his business. So, I mean, I understand. Maybe he's young and he feels insecure, but that really made me think.
Go on.
Okay, then I'll go on with another example. For example, because this is another small example. I mean, it's also the way people use language sometimes. And because, I don't know if it's because I'm a writer or I'm just very, very good at observing, or maybe a bit of both. And I said, oh, you guys were going on this holiday, what happened? And he said, yeah, and I quote his word. The girlfriend broke his foot or ankle or something like that. He didn't say my girlfriend, so I noticed that small distinction. So I don't know if it had any significance, but I noticed it.
Ooh, yeah. I would have noticed that too.
Yeah.
So that was your flatmate, and when publishing your book, what surprised you the most? Did readers get in touch with you, and what did they say?
I mean, mostly people who did get in touch with me, they were very, there's also people I know who directly got in touch with me personally, because again, I let people borrow my book, so I know Kirsten is so nice, she mentioned that you have the opportunity to buy the book, but you don't, I'll give you an example. You don't have to buy the book, you can borrow the book from me free of cost, because we have known each other for so long, and some of you borrowed the book, so I'm perfectly fine with that. You can borrow the book and you can read it, so that's a side comment. But coming more to the feedback people gave me, because there's 6 different stories in it, and so there's stuff that people definitely like. I think everyone who read this book loved the portrait wife, and I can understand that. It's an interesting story. But I can also understand there's at least 2 people who directly told me they hated the first story, but that's understandable too.
Which is not necessarily bad.
Yeah.
Which means you may have described something very emotional. Yeah.
I need to ask a question. How did you get on in the competition?
Okay, so these competitions have very strict criteria. I did not go into the shortlist or anything like that.
You were happy, were you, about that? Or?
I was okay with it. I mean, there is so much going on. There's always so much going on. That's why I think I like having so many things going on. So even if 1 or 2 projects crash, the rest just keeps going.
Yeah, perhaps put you one last question. What did you like to read when you were a child?
Okay, what did I like to read? I don't think I have read any of those typical children's books, to be honest. My sister read Harry Potter, so I never read Harry Potter actually. I mean, I saw the movies, and I think my sister read Harry Potter and then she narrated the story, so that's how we finished the 7 books. To be very honest, I didn't read so much when I was younger, but I think in general, we had many books at home, so we just randomly read books. Some of them were actually not in English. Some of them were by local or national authors. So there's, and then most people wouldn't know them here.
Okay.
I have a question relating to that. Tell me about the Pakistani thinking. You said they had their own books. What kind of books were they? I've never read. I've only ever read 3 Cups of Tea, which is based on Pakistan, but what influence do they have on you?
Okay, there's a very famous writer, Pakistani writer, and his name is Manto, M-A-N-T-O. So that's one of the most famous Pakistani writer, historical writer. And the reason he's so famous is because he wrote about things like partition, political issues, and during the 1947, before that, and after that, and so on. So that's one of the writers that was very popular in our home. He was also considered very bold from that point of view. That, I mean, many people still thought he was controversial, or that he addressed topics that were taboos, because he talked about prostitution and stuff like that in his stories. But this is interesting. He said, "I don't think I have an extremist viewpoint. I think that the society does not have a higher level of tolerance."
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Now maybe this one is for the two of you. Your brother Rahul sitting in the first row, but I'll ask a question to Saanwal because he's sitting on stage. You've been living in Germany for 10 years now, is that correct?
Yes.
If Germany played cricket, would you be supporting Germany or Pakistan?
That's a very good question. I think I wouldn't be supporting any of the countries because I don't play cricket.
He was very
Okay, I do believe you because
That's also
we
a
talked
fact.
about football before and you couldn't even. Okay, so you're not watching neither football nor cricket very much.
No, I'm allergic to all sports.
Okay. Okay, and you love energy drinks.
That's true.
Correct?
That's true.
So thank you, Saanwal, for a very interesting discussion, and I think you must have a very busy life. Now,
Yes, I like to keep myself busy. I think that's the right way of putting it. I think there's fundamentally two different types of people, and there's the people who would rather not have a busy life, and there's the people who have to have a busy life, and I'm the second kind.
absolute role model. Now it's the audience's time to ask questions if you have any outstanding questions. Yeah.
Monica.
Yes, I was wondering because in the portrait writing, of course, it's about art, and in the set girl, it's also art mentioned, and then you wrote something about math. What was it? Math behind the art or something? An article? The math behind art?
Do you mean it's...
No, not here. This was in Medium, in WordPress. And then I was in the review, of course, of the Girl with the Pearl Earring, and then I was wondering, are you or have you also been painting?
No, I'm not. I think I would have liked to learn to paint. This is maybe one of the many things, but no, I have never really painted. But I'm definitely inspired by pieces of art, that's for sure. Yes.
Because you also read about With the Mountain, the story that when her tears were frozen, and when you were writing about the climbing and everything, and I was also wondering, have you also been climbing this mountain or?
No, I don't climb. I don't do any. No sports. I have a strict no sports policy.
It was described like that. I thought that you actually climbed up.
Okay, I mean this is part of the. So to write this story, for example, I had to do research, and this is what many authors or writers do when they have to write about something they are not an expert in. But they have to write about that. They want to write about that. They do research, and I mean online you find basically everything about almost everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
I was just wondering, how come you saw more
simpler texts rather than the complicated ones.
Do you mean writing texts simpler?
Yeah. Reading in general.
I mean, basically, in general, I'm open to reading anything, but this is, I think, it should not, so if you want to read something for fun, it should not be an effort. And I think this is what many people would agree. For the most part, people want to have fun, they want to read something, they don't want to have to look up every single word in the English or the German dictionary if they start reading an English or German text. And I think Ernest Hemingway was the one who said that writing should really be simple, it should be easy, and so that the people can easily read and they can connect much better rather than with complicated writing that is just not letting you dive into the story.
No sports policy.
Yes, no sports policy. That's right. Yes.
And do you also write in another language apart from English?
Yes, I mean, I have actually, I don't know if there's anything published in German, but I have written stuff in German. I have written a few things in my national language, which is Urdu, but most of, like 99% of my content and all of my content that's published, it is in English. But going forward, I think I'm going to write more in German. My plan is to maybe do more non-fiction stuff in German, to be maybe because of my work with the Beirat, to maybe go into a bit more of journalism.
Yes.
Yes.
Out of all of your works, which one would you recommend the most as like an opening to what your writing is like?
I mean, there's basically, so far you will only find one piece of work that's available in hard form. So there's this one. So if you want to get introduced to my writing, this is what I would suggest.
Okay.
So if anyone has any other question, now would be the time.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, you were speaking about the students,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was wondering, John, who's John? How did you, is he a fiction of your mind, or can you identify with John? So.
I mean, this is an interesting question. John Smith, so the main character in The Portrait Wife.
Yeah.
I think, so this is an interesting case. I mean, I think he and we are in similar age. So that's one thing. But there's a, I mean, to some extent, so writing about a young person or a young man, and I'm more or less a young person myself. So in some ways, I mean, it's easy to imagine and write about something like that than to, for example, be writing about a person who is 10 years old, because I think I'm no longer 10 years old, so that's tricky. So to some extent, you could say it's inspired by my own thinking in some ways.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Good.
So, yeah. Thank you everybody for coming today. I think we all learned something new.
Ja. Ja. Vielen Dank. Vielen Dank für dein Lesen, für deine Offenheit und vielen Dank, Barbara.